about a bad outcome, you've done the wrong thing. So the moral value of an action is simply a function of the quality, the descriptive quality of the outcome, desirable or undesirable. John Stuart Mill, who was a utilitarian, which is a technical difference, has to do with what he thinks intrinsic value is, says, always act so as to bring about the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay? You all have heard that, and you all have an intuition for that. This is just cost-benefit analysis. And we do this often. We make moral decisions based on the relationship between the means and the ends. When your mom told you as a kid that the means, or that the ends don't justify the means, she was wrong. They may. They don't always, but they could. If the means are innocuous enough and the ends are good enough, then the ends, in fact, justify the means. That's why you give your child a vaccine. You're sticking a needle in your child, it hurts. That is bad. But the good that it does far outpaces the harm. John Stuart Mill, greatest good for the greatest number. Not everybody likes that. Immanuel Kant does not like consequentialism. He's what we call a deontologist. Think about this as rights theory. Kant asked the question, what makes me special as a human being? Why do I have special moral standing? Why is it different to rip an arm off of me, but I can take a piece of paper and rip it in half, and it's a completely different moral animal? What makes me special, ethically, that I somehow ought not to be destroyed, but you can destroy a piece of paper? Assuming that I paid for it, I didn't steal it, and I'm going to recycle it when it's over, and ... Kant thinks that what makes you special, ethically, is the fact that you're an autonomous agent. That you have an interest in how your life goes. The paper doesn't. And therefore, he says, if you're going to treat me like a human being, you need to treat me as an autonomous agent, someone who has autonomos. Auto is from the Latin. Auto is reflexive. Nomos is law. I am a self-ruler. You don't get to tell me what I have to do. I get to tell me what I have to do. Which translates in a strange argument, which is very powerful, to the categorical imperative. My favorite version of it, which is not on the screen, but my favorite version of the categorical imperative, which explains the role of autonomy, is act only on that maxim that you can at the same time will to become universal law. In other words, the only rules that you can enforce are the rules that any rational agent would enforce on him or herself. Because then you're not forcing it, they're doing it to themselves. Act only on that maxim that you can at the same time will to become universal law. Kant says it 3 different ways, means the same thing. Here's another version. Always treat people as ends in themselves, never as means only. Individuals have intrinsic value and need to be respected as such. They're not just useful what they can do for you. They have intrinsic value. That's why this would be rights theory. I have a right to be treated in a certain way. Third one. I'm going real fast, although you'll find out you can take all of Intro to Ethics in about 15 minutes if you do it right. Aristotle, virtue theory. Always act consistently with the standards of the role you play in life. Greek word, arete. Poorly and frequently translated as virtue. But it's not a list of good deeds that you're supposed to do. It's more like this. I am a teacher by virtue of the fact that I. Fill in the blank. Okay? So, Aristotle believes that everything in the universe has an arete. Instead of translating that virtue, translate it as characteristic activity, specific excellence, okay? Essence. Well, I don't want to get too Platonic now here, right? You've got to keep Aristotle and Plato separate. But a chair is a chair because it does what chairs do. From the time you're a young child, you can sit in one chair. Oh, that's a pretty good chair. Sit in another one and say, oh, this is a better chair than that one. Well, what are we doing? How from the time you're a child, you can tell that this is a better chair than that is? Because this performs the arete of a chair better than that. Chairs are supposed to be comfortable places to sit that hold your weight, that are easy to get up in and out of. If this one does it better, it's a better chair. Aristotle says, tell me the story of your life. This is narrative now. Tell me the story of your life, and I will tell you what the reasonable expectations are for your behavior, based on the roles you play. Parents have parental obligations that non-parents don't have. Physicians have medical obligations that non-physicians don't have. Social workers have social work obligations that non-social workers don't have. Parents have parental obligations that non-parents don't have. Why do I have to pay for my kids' college and you don't? Because they're my kids. I have a special relationship with them and I play a certain role, and that explains why they have a reasonable expectation that I will care for them, and not that you will. Put it in a nutshell, always act consistently with the standards of the role you play in life. Tell me your story, I'll know what we can expect of you. That's Aristotelian virtue theory. There's more to it than that, but in a nutshell. I got news for you. I've been doing clinical ethics now since 1990. I've never once sat by a patient's bed and asked, what would John Stuart Mill do if he were here solving this? I wish Aristotle were hanging over my shoulder. These theories are extremely important to know, and if you want to be a good clinical ethicist, you need to know them because they capture base-level moral intuitions that we share. But this is not a practical method for solving ethical problems. It doesn't work. It doesn't give you sufficient guidance detailed enough to a real-world case. You got to know it because it informs your judgment and it gives you a context in which to think, but it doesn't tell you what to do anywhere. There's another thing that people do. Some of you have probably read Beecham and Childress, Principles of Medical Ethics. They have 4 values that they talk about: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. So these are sort of the 4 big principles of medical ethics. Very important also to know this. These are extraordinarily important concepts, and we need to understand what an ethical problem is because we can see the tension between these different values. So I want to be beneficent, I want to help someone, but I also want to respect their autonomy. They're making a tough, a bad decision, I think a stupid decision. I really want to help them, but I want to also respect their autonomy. Autonomy and beneficence clash. What do I do? Very useful to have this vocabulary under your belt. Again, not going to solve a single real-world problem. Some would have you believe that these values are actually in lexicographical order. Autonomy is at the top. First you attend to autonomy. Once autonomy is satisfied, you still have a problem, you drop to do no harm, non-maleficence. Once you're done not harming people, you can actually try to help them. And once you help them, you can worry about justice, interrelational issues, distribution of pleasures and pains. You know what? Some of the most interesting ethical issues in the world are where autonomy and justice conflict, and it's not clear that autonomy wins. There are plenty of times when autonomy doesn't win. I'm hitting you in the nose repeatedly, and you say, well, Mike, you should stop. And I say, why? I'm just exercising my autonomy. I have a right to exercise my autonomy. I'm sorry if it gets your nose in the way of my fist, but it's my autonomy. We would clearly say, a justice claim, your right not to be punched, trumps my autonomy claim, my right to exercise my arm in any way I see fit. It is simply not true that autonomy always wins. Great values, gotta know them, not a process for ethical decision making. So here is the process. This is it. This is what you came for. Do it fine. Casuistry. You can think of it either as the eye doctor approach to ethics or as reverse engineering. And this is what it looks like. If I were to hand out paper and crayons to you and ask you to draw me a picture of ethics, a schematic rendering of what ethics, the structure of ethics looks like, after you sort of figured out what I was asking for, because that would be a weird request, my guess is that the vast majority of you would draw something like the left-hand side of this slide. This is a theoretical approach to ethics. So I remember the days, it was like the Jets versus the Sharks, the utilitarians versus the deontologists. We had softball teams in graduate school that were split down those theoretical lines, right? Because everybody assumed theory is where it's at. This is a top-down model of moral reasoning. You start with your theory up here, you have your cases, your difficult problems down here, and notice theory drives practice. Get square on your theory, you'll know what to do in the real world. Here's my point. This is not how ethics works. This can't be how ethics works. This is not how we teach ethics to our children. And although it is a nice, good-feeling sort of structure, it is in fact a fallacy. How do I know that? There are a number of problems with this structure, but I'll give you the two most decisive. One, if it's true that theory drives practice, Jesus too. I don't care what theory it is. By the way, if you take a religious view of ethics, just FYI, there's no distinction between religion and philosophy here, okay? A religious view of ethics is a deontologist's view. Immanuel Kant, deontologist believes there are some things that are just plain right because they're right, and you don't need to justify it based on consequences. Okay, so a deontologist is really anyone who's not a utilitarian. But Kant was a rational deontologist. He thought we could figure out what those rules are through exercise of reason. If you take a religious view of ethics, you're a deontologist. There are certain things that are just plain right. How do you know that? God said so. So you're a revelation-based deontologist rather than a rational deontologist, but you're still in the camp of moral reasoning. So just stick with what would Jesus do? Stick that in there. If theory drives practice, we need to agree on theory to know what to do in cases, but guess what? We're not all Christians.